was Joseph Ong exiting the stage now. Get started in just a moment. All set? All right, this is CS50, and this is the end of week 10. So some of you might have seen this already, but being circulated of late is an article that I thought I'd read an excerpt from and then show you a 3-minute video that paints the same picture. It was really a touching story, I thought, of this intersection of the real world with genuinely compelling uses of technology. So the article was entitled, "A Boy Oversleeps on Train, Uses Google Maps to Find Family 25 Years Later." And the first couple of paragraphs were, when Saru was 5 years old, he went with his older brother to scrounge for change on a passenger train in a town about 2 hours from his small hometown. Saru became tired and hopped on a nearby train where he thought his brother was, then fell asleep. When he woke up, he was in Calcutta, nearly 900 miles away. Saru tried to find his way back, but he didn't know the name of his hometown, and as a tiny, illiterate boy in a vast city full of forgotten children, he had virtually no chance of getting home. He was a street child for a while, until a local adoption agency hooked him up with an Australian couple who brought him to live in Hobart, Tasmania. Saru moved there, learned English, and grew up. But he never stopped looking for his family in his own and his hometown. Decades later, he discovered Google Earth and followed rail tracks, and giving himself a prescribed radius based on how long he thought he was asleep and how fast he thought the train was going. He knew he'd grown up in a warm climate. He knew he spoke Hindi as a child, and he'd been told that he looked like he was from East India. Finally, after years of scouring the satellite photos, he recognized a few landmarks, and after chatting with an administrator of a nearby town's Facebook page, he realized he'd found home. So here then is the video telling that tale from his perspective. Try this again.
It was 26 years ago, and I was just about to turn 5. We got to the train station and we boarded our train together. My brother just said, "I'll stay here and I'll come back." And I just thought, well, you know, I must just go to sleep and then just wake me up. And when I woke up the next day, the whole carriage was empty on a runaway train, a ghost train taking me I don't know where. I was adopted out to Australia to a Australian family, and Mum had decorated my room with the map of India, which she put next to my bedside. I woke up every morning seeing that map, and hence it sort of kept the memories alive. People would say, "You're trying to find a needle in a haystack, so you never find it." I'd have flashes of the places that I used to go, the flashes of my family faces. There was the image of my mother sitting down with her legs crossed, just watching her cry. Life is just so hard. That was my treasure. And I was looking at Google Map, realised there's Google Earth as well, a world where you could zoom into. I started to have all these thoughts and what possibilities that this could do for me. I said to myself, well, you know, you've got all the photographic memories and landmarks where you're from and you know what the town looks like. This could be an application that you could use to find your way back. I thought, well, I'll put a dot on Calcutta train station in a radius line that, you know, you should be searching around this area. I sort of came across these train tracks and I started following it, and I came to a train station which reflected the same image that was in my memories. Everything matched. I just thought, yep, I know where I'm going. I'm just going to let the map that I have in my head to lead me and take me back to my hometown. I came to the doorstep of the house that I was born and walked around about 15 metres around the corner. There was 3 ladies standing outside adjacent to each other, and the middle one stepped forward, and I just thought, this is your mother. She came forward, she hugged me, and you know, we were there for about 5 minutes. She grabbed my hand and she took me to the house and got on the phone. She rang my sister and my brother to say that, you know, your brother has just all of a sudden appeared like a ghost. And then the family was reunited again. Everything's all good. They helped my mother out. She doesn't have to be slaving away. She can live the rest of her life in peace. It was a needle in a haystack, but the needle was there. Everything's there. Everything we have in the world is the tap of a button, but you've got to have the will and the determination to wanting it.
Sweet story, and it actually reminds me of quite a topic that's been getting quite a bit of attention of late in the Crimson, more nationally in general, especially as MOOCs are sort of taking the stage of late, MOOCs being these massive and open online courses, of which CS50 is one, and people talking about how, for instance, the humanities aren't really catching up or aren't nearly as in vogue as they once were. And I would encourage you guys, much like Jonathan did on Monday, to think about as you exit 50, and we know already about 50% of you will not continue on to take another computer science course, and that's totally fine and expected, because one of the overarching goals of a class like this is really to empower you guys with just an understanding of how all of this stuff works and how this world of technology works, so that when you are back in your own worlds, whether it's pre-med or whether it's the humanities or the social sciences or some other field altogether, that you guys are bringing some technical savvy to the table and helping to make smart decisions when it comes to the use of and introduction of technology into your world. For instance, I was reminded of late too of 2 of the undergraduate classes I took years ago, which were such simple uses of technology but ever so compelling. First Nights with Professor Tom Kelly, if you've taken the class, is a class on classical music on this stage here where you learn a little something about music. It's actually First Nights that CS50 borrowed the idea of tracks for those less comfortable in between and more comfortable. In my time, they had different tracks for kids with absolutely no music experience, like me, and then kids who had been performing since they were 5 years old. And that class, for instance, just had a website, like most any other, but it was a website that allowed you to explore music on it and play back musical clips from class, from the web, and just use technology in a very seamless way. Another class years later that I audited essentially in grad school, Anthro 1010, Introduction to Archaeology here. It was amazing, and one of the most compelling yet super obvious, in retrospect, uses of software was that the professors in that class used Google Earth. We were sitting across the street in some lecture hall and couldn't travel, for instance, to the Middle East to the dig that one of the professors had just come back on, but we could do that virtually by flying around in Google Earth and looking at a bird's eye view at the dig site he had just returned from a week ago. So I would encourage you guys, especially in the humanities, to go back to those departments after this class, bringing your final projects with you or ideas of your own, and see just what you can do to infuse your own fields in humanities or beyond with a little bit of the sort of thing that we've explored here in CS50. So with that picture painted, thought we'd try to tackle 2 things today. One, try to give you a sense of where you can go after 50, and in particular, if you choose to tackle a web-based project, as is incredibly common, how you can go about taking off all of CS50's training wheels and going out there on your own and not having to rely on a PDF or a specification of a PSET, not having to rely on a CS50 appliance anymore, but can really pull yourself up by your bootstraps. With that said, C-based final projects are welcome. Things that use the Stanford Portable Library and graphics are welcome. We just know that statistically a lot of you will bite off projects in PHP and Python and Ruby and MySQL and other environments, so we'll bias some of our remarks toward that. that. But a quick look back. So we took for granted in PSET 7 the fact that $_session existed. This was a super global, a global associative array. And what does this let you do functionally? What's the feature this gives us? Yeah. To track the user's ID. And why is this useful? To be able to store inside of this super global J. Harvard or Scroob's or Malin's user ID when he or she visits a site. Exactly, so you don't have to log in again and again. It would be a really lame World Wide Web if every time you clicked a link on a site like Facebook or every time you clicked on an email in Gmail, you had to re-authenticate to prove that it's still you and not your roommate who might have walked up to your computer in your absence. So we use session to just remember who you are. And how is this implemented underneath the hood? How does a website that uses HTTP, the protocol that web browsers and servers speak, how does HTTP, which is a stateless protocol, let's say, and by stateless I mean once you connect to a website, download some HTML, some JavaScript, some CSS, your browser's icon stops spinning. You don't have a constant connection to the server. Typically, that's it. There's no state maintained constantly. So how is session implemented in such a way that every time you do visit a new page, the website remembers who you are? What's the underlying implementation detail? Shout it out. It's one word. Cookies. All right, so cookies. Well, how are cookies used? Well, recall that a cookie is generally just a piece of information, and it's often a big random number, but not always. And a cookie is planted on your hard drive or in your computer's RAM so that every time you revisit that same website, your browser reminds the server, I am user 1234567. I am user 1234567. And so long as the server has remembered that user 1234567 is J. Harvard, the website will just assume that you are who you say you are. And recall that we present these cookies sort of in the form of a virtual hand stamp. It's sent in the HTTP headers just to remind the server that you are who it thinks you are. Of course, there's a threat. What threat does this open us up to if we're essentially using sort of a club or an amusement park mechanism for remembering who we are? If you copy someone's cookie and hijack their session, so to speak, you can pretend to be someone else, and the website, most likely, is just going to believe you. So we'll come back to that, because the other theme for today, beyond empowerment, is also talking about the very scary world we live in and just how much of what you do on the web, how much of what you do even on your cell phones today can be tracked really by anyone between you and point B. And Ajax, recall, we looked only briefly at this, although you've been using it indirectly in PSET 8 because you're using Google Maps and because you're using Google Earth. Google Maps and Google Earth don't download the entire world to your desktop, obviously, the moment you load PSET 8. It only downloads like a square of the world or a bigger square of the Earth. And then every time you sort of steer out of range, you might notice, especially if on a slow connection, you might see some gray for a moment or a bit of fuzzy imagery as the computer downloads more such tiles, more such imagery from the world or the Earth. And Ajax is generally the technique via which websites are doing that. Once you need more of the map, your browser is going to use Ajax, which is not itself a language or technology. It's just a technique. It's the use of JavaScript to go get more information from a server that allows your browser to go get what's to the east or what's to the west of what's otherwise currently being shown in that map. So this is a topic that many of you will encounter either directly or indirectly via final projects if you choose to make something that's similarly dynamic, that's pulling data from some third-party website. So we've got a really exciting next Wednesday ahead, Quiz 1, the information for which is on CS50.net already. Know that there'll be a review session this coming Monday at 5:30. We'll post the date and time. The date and time is already posted on CS50.net in that About sheet. And do let us know if you have any questions. PSET 8, meanwhile, is already in your hands. And let me just address one FAQ to save folks some stress. For the most part, a lot of the chatter we see at office hours and a lot of the bugs we see reported on Discuss are indeed bugs in a student's code. But when you've encountered something like the Google Earth plugin crashing or not even working, and you are confident it's not you, it's not a Chmod issue, it is not a bug you introduced into the distribution code, realize, just FYI, this is sort of plan Z, that the last time we used this problem set and we ran into similar issues, there's a line of code in service.js that essentially is this, that says turn buildings on, and a workaround the last time we did this in, again, corner cases where students just couldn't get the darn thing to work is changed true to false in that one line of code, and you'll find it if you search through service.js. I don't recommend this because you will create the most barren landscape of Cambridge, Massachusetts. This will literally flatten your world so that all you see are the teaching fellows and course assistants on the horizon and no buildings. But realize for whatever reason the Google Earth plugin seems still to be buggy a year later, so this might be your fail-safe. So rather than resort to tears, resort to turning buildings off if you know it's the plugin that's not cooperating on your Mac or PC. But this is, again, last resort if you're sure it's not a bug. So the hackathon, a couple of teasers just to get you excited. We had quite a few RSVPs, and just to paint a picture of what awaits, I thought I'd give you a few seconds recall of this imagery from last year. We even have our literal CS50 shuttles. So that's what awaits you in terms of the hackathon, and this will be an opportunity, to be clear, not to start your final projects, but to continue working on your final projects alongside classmates and staff, and lots of food. And again, if you're awake at 5 a.m., we'll take you down the road to IHOP. The CS50 Fair, meanwhile, is the climax for the entire class, where you'll bring your laptops and friends, maybe even family, to a room on campus down the street to exhibit your projects on laptops, on tall tables like this with lots of food and friends and music in the background, as well as our friends from industry, companies like Facebook and Microsoft and Google and Amazon and bunches of others, so that if interested in just hearing about the real world or chatting with folks about real-world internship or full-time opportunities, know that some of our friends from industry will be there. And a couple of pictures we can paint here are as follows. So that then is the CS50 Fair. So let's now proceed to tell a story that really will empower you, hopefully, for things like final projects. So a few little things to seed your mind, either for final projects or just more generally for projects that you might decide to tackle after the course. These are all documented on manual.cs50.net, where the CS50 manual, where we have lots of techniques documented. And this is just shorthand notation for saying that there exist in the world things called SMS to email gateways, which is a fancy way of saying there's servers in the world that know how to convert emails to text messages. So if for your final project you want to create some sort of mobile-themed service that allows you to alert friends or users to events on campus or what's being served in the D hall that night or any such alert feature, know that it's simple as sending an email, as with PHP Mailer, which you might have used for PSET 7, or we saw briefly a week or so ago, to addresses like this. And in fact, you can text this, assuming your friend has a unlimited texting plan and you don't want to charge them 10 cents. But if you send an email to your friend who you know to have Verizon or AT&T using Gmail and just sending it to their phone number at whatever the subdomain there is, realize you will send a text message. But this is one of those things to be careful of. If you troll through last year's CS50 videos, I think it was, a horrific bug I wrote in code, ended up sending about 20,000 text messages live to our students in class. And only because someone noticed that they were getting multiple text messages from me did I have the wherewithal to hit Control-C quickly and stop that process. Control-C, recall, is your friend in instances of infinite loop. So beware the power we have just given to you, rather irresponsibly, most likely, based on my own experience. But that's on the web and has been there for some time. All right, so textmarks.com. So this is a website, and there's bunches of others out there as well, that we've actually used as a class for years to be able to receive text messages. Unfortunately, sending text messages is easy as sending emails like that. Receiving is a little harder, especially if you want to have one of those sexy short codes that's only 5 or 6 digits long. So for instance, for years, you've been able to send a text message, and you can try this as well, to 41411, and that's the phone number for this particular startup. And if you send a message to 41411, I'll just write it up here, so 41411, and then send them a message like S-boy for shuttle boy, and then type in something like Mather quad. So you send that text message to that phone number. Within a few seconds, you should get back a response from the CS50 shuttle boy service, which is the shuttle scheduling software that we've had out there on the web for some time, and it will respond to you via text message. Because what we have done as a class, as a programmer, is to write software, configured our free account with text marks to listen for text messages sent to S-boy at that number, and what they do is forward those text messages to our PHP-based website as HTTP parameters saying, here, this user with this phone number sent you this text message, do with it what you want. So we wrote some software that upon receiving a string like S-boy space Mather space quad, we parse it, we figure out where the spaces are between words, and we, as a class, decide how to respond to that. And if you try that now, for instance, you should see via response within a few seconds the next few shuttles going from Mather to the quad, if any. And there's other stops. You can type in Boylston or other such stops on campus, and it should recognize those words. So parse.com, this is another service that we've been pointing some students at for final projects that's wonderful in that it's free for a reasonable amount of usage. And if I go to parse.com, you'll see that this is an alternative to actually having something like your own MySQL database. And frankly, it's just kind of mesmerizing. This is what's inside of the cloud, even on a cloudy day. So parse.com allows you to do a bunch of interesting things, and there's other alternatives to this out there. For instance, you can use them as your back-end database, so you don't need to have a web hosting company. You don't need to have a MySQL database. You can instead use their back-end. If you're doing a mobile project for Android or iOS or the like, know that there exist things like push services, so you can push alerts to your friends or your users' home screens, and then a bunch of other features as well. So if of interest, check out these websites and websites like them to just see how many other people's shoulders you can stand on to make really cool software of your own. Now, in terms of authentication, an FAQ is how do you actually guarantee that your users are people on campus, Harvard students or faculty or staff? So CS50 has its own authentication service called CS50 ID. Go to that URL, and you can restrict your website to anyone with a Harvard ID, for instance. So know that we can handle that. You guys should not be in the business of saying, what's your Harvard ID? What's your Harvard PIN? Let me now do something with it. We'll do all of that. And what we'll give you back is someone's name and email address, but not anything sensitive. An app on a mobile device? It can be made to work on a mobile device, but it's not quite designed for that, so you'll end up spending a non-trivial amount of time doing so. So I would discourage that route for now. This is really intended for web-based applications. So web hosting. So if you haven't seen on the course's homepage, and here's where we'll begin a story, web hosting is all about paying for usually a service, a server owned by someone else on the web that has an IP address, and you then put your website on it. And they usually give you email accounts and databases and other such features. Know that if you don't want to actually pay for such, go to that URL there, and CS50 actually has a nonprofit account that you can use to actually have not http://project inside of the appliance for your final project. If you actually want it to be something like isawYouHarvard.com, you can buy that domain name, although not that particular one, and then you can go about hosting it on a public web server like we can offer you guys through here. And in fact, if unfamiliar, if you've never been to isawYouHarvard.com, one, go there, but two, know that that was a young lady's name by the young woman's name by Tej Tor, 3 years ago, who was a CS50 alumna who happened a day or two before the CS50 fair, sent out an email to her house mailing list, and voila, 2 days later by the CS50 fair, she had hundreds of users all creeping on each other on her website and saying how they had seen her or him on campus. So that's one of CS50's favorite success stories from a CS50 final project. So how do you go about putting a website like that on the internet? Well, there's a few such ingredients here. So one, you have to buy a domain name. There are bunches of places in the world from which you can buy a domain name. And for instance, one that we recommend only because it's popular and it's cheap, it's called namecheap.com. But you can go to GoDaddy.com and dozens of others out there. You can read up on reviews. But for the most part, it doesn't matter from whom you buy a domain name. And they vary in price, and they vary in suffix. These suffixes like .com, .net, .org, .io, .tv, those actually vary in price. But if we wanted to do something like cats.com, we can go to this website, click search. Presumably this one is taken. But apparently catsagainst.com is available. Pluscats.com is available. Love Cats, Cats Corner, dampcats.net. All of this hopefully pseudo-randomly generated. If you want cats.pw, $1,500 only, which is a bit insane. So someone has really snatched up all the cat-related domain names here for varying prices. As an aside, let's see, who has cats.com? Know that you guys have at your disposal fairly sophisticated commands now. Like I can type literally, who is cats.com. And because of the way the internet is structured, you can actually see who has registered this. Apparently, this person is using a proxy service. So whoever owns cats.com doesn't want the world to know who they are. So they've registered it through some random privacy service. But sometimes you actually get actual owners. And this is to say, especially if you're pursuing some startup and you really want some domain name and you're willing to pay someone else for it, you can figure out contact information in that way. But also interesting is this. Let me scroll up to this portion. So this is that same output. And this is just tacky. So apparently cats.com can be yours for the right price. But what's interesting here is that the name servers, this is total abuse of what a name server is supposed to be. Your name server is not supposed to be this domain for sale.com. If we actually choose something like, let's choose something a little more legitimate, like who is google.com. And scroll up here. So here, what happened there? Interesting. Beyond who is. Let's keep it more low-key. Who is MIT.edu? OK, this is helpful. So this is what I was hoping for, legitimate use of the DNS service. Name servers here indicate the following. This is MIT's way of saying whenever someone in the world, wherever they are, types in MIT.edu and hits enter, your laptop, whether Mac or PC, will somehow eventually figure out that the people in the world that know what the IP address is for MIT.edu or any of the subdomains at MIT.edu are any of these servers here. And it actually looks like MIT's infrastructure is pretty robust, as you would expect. They have multiple name servers, which is good for redundancy. And in fact, they seem to be globally distributed across the world. A bunch of those seem to be in the US, a couple in Asia, one in Europe, two and somewhere else. But the point here is that DNS, that we've been taking for granted and generally described as a big Excel table that has IP addresses and domain names, is actually a fairly sophisticated hierarchical service, so that in the world, there's actually a finite number of servers that essentially know where all of the .coms are, or all of the .net are, all of the .orgs are, and so forth. So when you go ahead and buy a domain name from a place like Namecheap or GoDaddy or any other website, one of the key steps that you'll have to do, if you do this even for your final project, is tell the registrar from whom you're buying the domain name who in the world knows your website's IP addresses, who your name servers are. So if you use, for instance, CS50's hosting account, we happen to have this account through dreamhost.com, which is a popular web hosting company. They will tell you that you should buy your domain and tell the world that your domain's name server is ns1.dreamhost.com, ns2.dreamhost.com, and ns3.dreamhost.com. But that's it. Buying a domain name means giving them the money and getting ownership of the domain. It's more like a rental, though. You get it for a year, and then they bill you recurringly for the rest of your life until you cancel the domain name. And then you tell them who the name servers are. But then you're done with your registrar, and from there, you'll interact only with your web hosting company, which in CS50's case will be DreamHost. But again, more documentation will be provided to you if you decide to go that route. So if you do this after the course's end, simply Googling web hosting company will turn up thousands of options, and I would generally encourage you to ask friends who might have used a company before if they recommend them and had a good experience, because there's a lot of fly-by-night web hosting companies, like a guy in his basement with a server that has an IP address, he has some extra RAM and hard disk space, and just sells web hosting accounts, even though there's no way that server could handle hundreds of users or thousands of users. So realize you will get what you pay for. For quite a while, for my personal homepage, and this was totally acceptable because I had like 2 visitors a month, I was paying like $2.95 a month, and I'm pretty sure it was in someone's basement. But again, you don't get necessarily any guarantees of uptime or scalability. So again, you're typically looking at something more than that. Well, what about SSL? So what's SSL used for? Let's now start to steer in the directions of security and things that can harm us, especially as you venture out on your own. What's SSL, or what's SSL used for? Security, okay, so it's used for security. What does that mean? So it stands for Secure Sockets Layer, and it is indicated by a URL that starts with HTTPS://. Many of us have probably never typed HTTPS://, but you'll often find that your browser is redirected from HTTP to HTTPS so that everything is thereafter encrypted. FYI, using SSL requires typically that you have a unique IP address, and typically to get a unique IP address, you need to pay a web hosting company a few dollars more per month. So realize this is very easily implemented these days by buying an IP address and by buying what's called an SSL certificate, but realize that it does come at some additional cost. And as we'll try to scare in just a bit, it's not even necessarily 100% protective of whatever it is you're trying to protect. So for security, I thought I'd do a sort of a random segue here. As you might know from CS50's lecture videos, our production team has been a fan, as I have, of taking really nice photography of campus, and aerial photography most recently. If you ever look up and you see something flying with a little camera, it may actually be CS50, and I just thought I'd share a minute of some of the footage the team has gathered, particularly as we look to the spring semester and next fall. If any of you have a knack for photography, videography, we would love to get you involved behind the scenes, but more on those details in a week. Turns out there's a miniature golf course on the top of the stadium that we never knew about.
Me press trigger, me no press people button. Nobody chat come face me with some. Like how me have 22 in a me something. Then I feel so forget the next 1,000 fool. Press trigger, me no press people button. Nobody chat come face me with some. Like how me have 22 in a me something. Then I feel so forget the next 1,000 fool. Anytime you ready, put a whistle start war. See who the fist spread it out, up on the style is the bomb, the dang, diggy diggy. A room boy don't play with the bomb, the dang, diggy diggy. My style is.
You can see the outline of the drone there.
Bomb, the dang, diggy diggy. A room boy don't play with the bomb, the dang, diggy diggy. Go now, we sit down and now watch your man a live. Watch your man a war now, who are.
The best part here is watch the jogger on the left.
Big. Sit down and a plan for come put man for bridge. Remember when you dig hole that hole you fit in. Certain little boy we are stop deal with. Clips of them a friend and them bad mind your friend. Style is the bomb, the dang, diggy diggy. A room boy no play with the bomb, the dang, diggy diggy. My style is the bomb, the dang, diggy diggy.
Another example of what you can do with technology that's only tangentially, frankly, related to security, but I thought that'd be a more fun way of just saying security. So let's see if we can't scare you guys now with not only a bit of a few threats, but also an underlying understanding of what these threats are, so that moving forward, you can decide how and whether to defend yourself against these things, and at least be mindful of them as you make decisions as to whether or not to send that email, whether or not to log into that website, whether or not to use that cyber cafe's Wi-Fi access point, so that you know what the threats are indeed around you. So Jonathan referred to something like this on Monday. He had a Windows screenshot. This one is of a Mac. How many of you have ever installed software on your Mac or PC? Obviously, everyone. How many of you have given much thought to typing in your password when prompted? I mean, even I don't, frankly. So a couple of us are good at being paranoid, but consider what you're actually doing here. On a typical Mac or PC, you have an administrator account, and typically you're the only one using a laptop, at least these days. So your account, Malin or JHarvard or whatever it is the administrator account, and what that means is you have root access to your computer. You can install anything you want, delete anything you want, and typically these days, because of dated design decisions from years ago, the way most software gets installed is as an administrator. And even if your Mac or PC has at least gotten smart enough over the years with the latest incarnations of Mac OS and Windows to not run your username by default as the administrator, when you download some new program off the internet and try to install it, you're probably going to be prompted for your password. But the catch is, at that point, you're literally handing the keys of your computer over to whatever random program you just downloaded and allowing it to install whatever it wants. And as Jonathan alluded to, realize that it may say that it wants to install your software that you care about, Spotify or iTunes or whatever it is you're trying to install. But you're literally trusting the author or authors of the software to only do what the program is supposed to do. But there is absolutely nothing stopping most programs on most operating systems from deleting files, from uploading them to some company's website, from trolling around for encrypting things. And again, we've sort of built an entire infrastructure over the years on trust. And so realize that you've just been trusting random people and random companies for the most part. And as Jonathan alluded to too, sometimes those companies themselves are sort of knowingly malicious, right? Sony caught a lot of flack a few years ago for installing what was called a rootkit on people's computers without their knowledge. And the gist of this was that when you bought a CD, for instance, that they didn't want you to be able to copy or rip the music off of, the CD would install, without your knowing, a rootkit on your computer. Rootkit just meaning software that runs as administrator that potentially does bad things. But among the things this thing did was it hid itself. So some of you might be pretty savvy with your computer and know, well, I can just open the task manager or the activity monitor, and I can look at all of the arcanely named programs that are running, and if anything looks suspicious, I'll just kill it or delete it. But that's what the rootkit did. It essentially said, if running task manager, don't show yourself. So the software was there, and only if you really, really looked hard could you even find it. And this was done in the name of copy protection, but just imagine what could have been done otherwise. Now, in terms of protecting yourself, a lot of websites are wonderfully gracious in that they put these padlock icons on their homepage, which means that the website is secure. This is from bankofamerica.com this morning. So what does that little padlock icon there mean next to the sign in button? Absolutely nothing. It means someone knows how to use Photoshop to make a picture of a padlock icon. Like, quite literally. The fact that it's there is meant to be a positive signal to the user, like, ooh, secure website. I should trust this website, and now type in my username and password. And this has been conventional for years, as recently as this morning. But consider the habits that this is getting us into. Consider the implicit message that all of these banks, in this case, have been sending us for years. If you see padlock, then secure. All right, so how can you abuse that system of trust if you're the bad guy? Put a padlock on your website, and logically the users have been conditioned for years to assume padlock means secure. And it might actually be secure. You might have a wonderfully secure SSL HTTPS connection to a fake website.com. And no one else in the world can see that you're about to hand him or her your username and password to your account. This, though, perhaps is a little more reassuring. So this is a screenshot of the top of my browser this morning at bankofamerica.com. And notice here, too, we have a padlock icon. What does it mean in this context, in Chrome at least? So this is now using SSL. So this is actually a better thing. And the fact that Chrome is making it green is meant to draw our attention to the fact that this is not only over SSL, this is a company that someone out there has verified is actually bankofamerica.com. And that means that Bank of America, when buying their so-called SSL certificate, essentially big random, somewhat random numbers that implement security for them, they have been verified by some independent third party that says, yep, this is actually the CEO of Bank of America trying to buy the certificate. Chrome will therefore trust that certification authority and say in green, this is bankofamerica.com. And Bank of America just pays a few $100s for that, or a few thousand, as opposed to a few tens of dollars. But here, too, how many of you have ever behaved any differently because the URL in your browser is green instead of black? Right? And yet here, so a couple of us, and that's good to be paranoid, but even then, those of you who even notice these things, do you actually stop logging into a otherwise secure website if the URL is not green? Right? So probably not, right? At least most of us, if it's not green, most likely you're just going to be like, whatever. Like, I want to log into this website. That's why I'm here. I'm going to log in nonetheless. As an aside, Chrome is a little better about this, but there's a lot of browsers, like Firefox, for instance, at least for some time, where that padlock icon is, you can actually put any icon of your own. Let me see what the latest version of Firefox looks like. So if we go to CS50.net, okay, so they've gotten better as well. What the browsers used to do is, like, here's, for instance, SEAS's crest up here. That's the so-called favorite icon for a website. Years ago, actually not that long ago, that little shield would have been right here next to the URL, because some some genius decided that it would just look pretty classy to have your graphical logo right next to your URL. I mean, in design-wise, that actually is pretty compelling. So what did bad guys start doing? They started changing their favorite icons, their default icon for a homepage, to be not a crest, but a padlock, which had absolutely no meaning other than their favorite icon was a padlock. It had no indications of security. So the lessons here are a couple, I think. One is that there are actually some well-intentioned mechanisms for teaching us users about security, even if you weren't even aware what green meant or what even HTTPS meant. But if those mechanisms get us into the bad habit of trusting websites when we see those positive signals, they're very easily abused, as we saw just a moment ago with something silly like this. So session hijacking comes into play, as we said before, with cookies, for instance. And what does this actually mean? Well, with session hijacking, this is all about stealing someone's cookies. So if I open up Chrome here, for instance, and I open up the inspector down here, and I go to the network tab, and we've done this before, and I go to something like http://facebook.com, enter, a whole bunch of stuff goes across the screen because of all the images and CSS and JavaScript files. But if I look at this one here, notice that Facebook is indeed planting one or more cookies on my browser right here. So these are essentially the hand stamps that represent me. And hopefully my browser will present this again and again when revisiting that website. But that only is secure, we said a couple weeks ago, if you're using SSL. But even SSL itself can be compromised. Consider, after all, the way SSL works. When your browser connects to a remote server via https://, long story short, cryptography is involved. It's not as simple as Caesar or Visionaire or even DES from a while back in PSET 2. It's more sophisticated than that. It's called public key cryptography, but really big, and really random numbers are used to scramble information between point A, U, and point B, like Facebook.com. But the problem is, how many of us, again, ever type in https:// to start our website connection in that secure mode? I mean, how many of you even type http://facebook.com? Or if you do, like, hello, you don't need to do that anymore, right? The browser will figure it out. But most of us do indeed just type facebook.com, because if we're using a browser, the browsers have gotten smart enough by 2013 to assume if you're using a browser, you type in an address, you probably want to access it not via email or instant message, you mean HTTP and port 80. Those conventions have been adopted. But how does redirection work? Well, notice what happens here. If I go back to Chrome, and let's actually, let's do this in incognito mode so that all of my cookies are thrown away. And let me go here to, again, facebook.com. And let's see what happens. Recall that the first request was indeed just for facebook.com. But what was the response that I got? It wasn't a 200 OK. It was 301, which is a redirect telling me to go to http://www.facebook.com, which is where Facebook wants me to go. But then if we look at the next request, and we've seen this before, notice what their second response is, specifically that they want me now to go to the SSL version of Facebook. So here